I found the journal the morning after the storm, buried behind a stack of dusty linens in the attic. The air was still damp, smelling of wood rot and old perfume. My mother's scent, faint but stubborn, like she hadn't left the house even after she was gone. The notebook was wrapped in a silk scarf I remembered from her church days, the one she used to drape over her shoulders like a badge of pride. I hesitated before untying it, as though the scarf itself were warning me not to. On the first page, written in her careful handwriting, were 6 words that froze me in place. For Claire, when silence becomes unbearable. I hadn't cried at her funeral. I didn't even cry when they lowered her coffin into the ground. But holding that journal, feeling the weight of her words before I'd even read them, something cracked inside me. It was as if she had left behind not memories, but a confession. The house had been quiet since she died, too quiet. My father rarely came downstairs anymore, and when he did, he spoke in fragments, like language itself had become exhausting. My brother Daniel had left the morning after the reading of the will. No goodbye, no explanation. Just a single message: don't look for me. I can't stand that house. I used to think he was cruel for leaving me to clean up the mess. Now, with the journal in my hands, I wasn't so sure. The first entry was dated April 14th, 2005, the year everything changed for our family, though I hadn't understood it then. The words were so calm they frightened me. People think kindness is about gentleness. They forget it can also be control. A soft tone can bend more wills than an iron fist. I kept reading. She wrote about my father, about how his weaknesses needed guidance, how she steered him away from bad decisions, how she protected him from himself. Each sentence was neat, precise, detached, like she was documenting a scientific experiment, not a marriage. But then, there was Daniel. He's too much like his father, impulsive, sentimental. I've tried to help him see reason, but he resists. Perhaps distance will teach him obedience. I stopped reading. My hands trembled. I wanted to believe she was exaggerating, that these were the private ramblings of a tired woman trying to make sense of her life. But deep down, I knew they weren't. My mother had always known how to bend people to her will. I used to admire it. Now it terrified me. By the time I reached the 5th page, she started writing about me. Claire doesn't question me. That's why she'll inherit the house. She believes what I tell her. That's what makes her safe. I slammed the journal shut so hard the silk scarf fell to the floor. My breath caught in my throat. Safe. That word echoed in my head like an accusation. All those times she'd smiled at me, told me I was the only one who understood her, the only one who never disappointed her. It had all been manipulation. She hadn't loved me because of who I was. She'd loved me because I was easy to control. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind outside howled against the window panes, and the floorboards creaked like whispers under the weight of the truth. I went back to the attic, lit a candle, and kept reading. The house is the root of everything. The land holds what we built, what we buried. Daniel doesn't deserve it, not after what he did. It has to stay with Claire. She won't ask questions. The next line was crossed out, but I could still make it out beneath the ink. Unless she ever finds out what happened that night. That night, my pulse quickened. She didn't say which night, just that one phrase, hanging there like a thread waiting to be pulled. I turned the page, but the next few entries were missing, torn clean out. Only a few scraps remained along the spine, ragged and burned at the edges. I stared at the empty space for what felt like hours. Then I realized something. The missing pages weren't random. They lined up exactly with the week Daniel had run away for the first time, 15 years ago. He'd come back a month later, silent and pale, refusing to speak to anyone except Dad. Mom said it was just a phase. I believed her. Now I wasn't sure what to believe. The following morning, I brought the journal downstairs to my father's study. The curtains were still drawn, the air heavy with dust and old tobacco. He was sitting in his chair by the window, staring at the garden where my mother used to plant roses every spring. "Dad," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper, "did Mom ever tell you about the house deed?" He looked at me slowly, like he wasn't sure who I was. "The deed? Yes. She mentioned something in her journal. About changing it." His hands tightened around the armrests. "She made me sign everything over to her name," he said quietly. "Said it was for legal protection. I didn't question it." My stomach twisted. "Did you know she sold the North Field?" He blinked, confusion clouding his eyes. "She sold it. She wrote about it. I said. To someone named C. Rogers. My father's face went pale. Charles Rogers. That man has been trying to buy that land for years. I told her no. She promised me she wouldn't. I didn't know what to say. He looked smaller somehow, like the realization had taken the last bit of strength he had. She always said she was doing what was best for us, he murmured. I wanted to believe her. So did I whispered. When I left the study, I felt the house closing in on me. Every photograph on the wall, my mother smiling beside Daniel, my parents at their anniversary party, felt like a lie I'd been living inside. The silence she'd left behind wasn't peace. It was the sound of truth filling the spaces she'd kept empty. That night, I packed a bag and took the journal with me. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay there. As I stepped outside, the wind carried the scent of rain and lilacs, her favorite flower. For a brief second, I almost turned back. Then I remembered her words. Unless she ever finds out what happened that night. I locked the door and didn't look back. The next morning, I woke up in the small motel off Route 17, the kind of place where the curtains never fully close and the air smells faintly of bleach and old coffee. I had driven half the night, my headlights cutting through the fog like a knife, the journal lying on the passenger seat as if it were alive, whispering every time the road curved. I didn't know what I was running from, the house, my mother, or the version of myself that had believed her for so long. I made coffee in the room's chipped mug and opened the journal again, hoping for clarity, but what I found was something far worse. The next entry was written weeks after the last one, and the handwriting looked shakier, as if her control was slipping. Daniel doesn't understand sacrifice. He sees betrayal where there was only love. He'll ruin everything if he keeps talking. I froze, reread the line, then the one below it. I warned him what would happen if he didn't stop. He didn't listen. My breath caught. There was a long scratch across the page, as if she'd pressed the pen too hard, then scribbled over something she regretted writing. For the first time, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty room. What had she done to Daniel? I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over his name. He hadn't answered any of my calls since the funeral. When I finally pressed dial, it rang twice before his voice came through, flat, tired, and colder than I remembered. Claire. I found her journal, I said quickly. There's something you need to see. A long silence followed. Throw it away, he said. You don't want to read that. Daniel, what did she mean about you talking? About ruining everything? Another pause, longer this time. I could hear wind on his end, the faint sound of traffic. She warned me, too, he said quietly. And when I didn't listen, she made sure no one else would believe me. What are you talking about? I whispered. Claire, listen to me. That journal isn't the whole truth. It's her version of control. She wanted you to find it. Why would she? Because she knew you'd chase after what she left unsaid. His voice cracked on the last word, and I could hear him breathing hard, like he was trying not to lose his composure. Please, Claire, don't let her keep doing this. The line went dead. I sat there staring at the phone, my heart pounding. I wanted to call him back, but something stopped me. The way he said, keep doing this, made it sound like she was still pulling the strings, even from the grave. I opened the journal again, flipping through pages filled with corrections, arrows, margins full of notes. Her tone shifted, colder, darker, paranoid. They think they know the truth. But the truth is what survives, not what's spoken. Daniel doesn't understand what must be protected. Claire will understand one day. I closed the book, pressing my hand against the worn leather cover. Maybe Daniel was right. Maybe she had written it not as a confession, but as a trap. The more I read, the more I wanted to uncover. The more I uncovered, the deeper I sank into her shadow. By noon, I was back on the road, driving toward the town she'd grown up in, a place I'd only heard about in passing. She used to call it the beginning, like it was where everything she became had started. I didn't know what I was hoping to find, only that I couldn't stop now. The old farmhouse was still there, leaning against the horizon like a ghost that refused to leave. Paint peeled from the siding, and the windows were clouded with grime. An old woman watering her garden across the road looked up as I parked. You're a Weston, aren't you? She asked, squinting at me. You look like your mother. I hesitated, then nodded. Did you know her? Everyone knew her. The woman said, her tone unreadable. Your grandfather, too. Lord, that man was something else. My grandfather? I frowned. He died before I was born. He did. she said slowly. But not before your mother made sure the land stayed hers. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine. What do you mean? The woman leaned on her watering can. There was trouble. Fights about inheritance. Property lines. Promises broken. I heard your uncle left after some bad business. She had a brother? The woman looked surprised. Didn't she tell you? My mouth went dry. No, I whispered. She didn't. When I got back to the car, I opened the journal again, flipping through it until I found a faint note scrawled at the bottom of a page. Some deaths don't die when people do. I pressed my hand against the words, feeling their weight sink into me. There was a story she'd buried long before I was born, and it wasn't just about Daniel or my father. It went further back, to the roots of everything she'd built and lied to protect. As I drove away from that farmhouse, I caught sight of something in the rearview mirror, a figure standing near the window of the old house, pale, still, watching. My chest tightened. For a moment, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but I knew what it really was, the past, waiting for me to stop running. I gripped the wheel tighter and kept driving, the journal open on the seat beside me, the wind tearing through the silence like a voice I could almost recognize. I spent that night in my car at a rest stop just outside of Fairview. I couldn't bring myself to get a room again. The journal sat on the passenger seat, the cover reflecting the glow of the streetlight. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the words she'd written. Some deaths don't die when people do. They echoed like a curse. I wanted to believe it was just her being dramatic, but the look on that old woman's face told me otherwise. By dawn, I was already driving again, chasing a direction that felt less like a choice and more like gravity. Fairview was the kind of town that had once been something: red brick buildings, a faded diner sign, a post office that looked like it hadn't handled a real letter in years. The wind carried the smell of rain and old soil. I found the courthouse easily. It was one of the only buildings that didn't look abandoned. Inside, it smelled like mildew and dust. A clerk in her 60s sat behind the counter, glasses perched low on her nose. "Can I help you?" she asked, looking up at me like she already knew my answer would be complicated. "I'm looking for property records," I said. "For the Weston family. My mother was Margaret Weston." Her eyes flickered. "You're her daughter?" I nodded, bracing for whatever came next. She sighed. "That name hasn't been asked for in a long time. Not since, well, since the case." "What case?" "Property dispute. Between your mother and her brother, Henry Weston. Ended ugly." She turned to a filing cabinet, pulled out a thick folder, and slid it toward me. "You'll find more than you want in there." I carried the folder to a table and opened it. Newspaper clippings, court statements, even old photographs. My mother, younger, sharper, standing beside a man I didn't recognize. Henry Weston. His eyes were the same shade of green as mine. The headline from one article hit me like a punch. "Local family feud over inheritance turns violent. One hospitalized." My hands trembled as I read. The article described how my grandfather had left the family land to both children, but disputes over debts and ownership had escalated. A confrontation turned physical. Henry ended up in the hospital with a head injury. No charges were filed. The case was settled privately. I sat there staring at those words until they blurred. She'd never mentioned any of it. Not once. Not the fight. Not the brother. Not the blood. The journal was still in my bag, and I could almost feel it pulsing there, demanding to be opened. When I finally did, I found the next entry written in her neat, controlled handwriting. He forced my hand. I never wanted it to end that way, but weakness destroys families. I did what was necessary. I felt the air leave my lungs. Beneath that line was a single word, circled twice. Protect. I didn't know if she was talking about protecting me, the land, or herself, but it was clear she didn't see herself as guilty, only justified. My phone buzzed suddenly, and I jumped. Daniel again. I hesitated before answering. "Where are you?" he asked. His voice was calmer now, but still wary. "Fairview. I found the records. She had a brother, Daniel. A brother she never told us about." "Don't dig any deeper," he said, his tone sharp now. "You don't know what you're waking up." "What are you not telling me?" I snapped. "You knew something. You always did." "Claire, listen to me," he said. "There's a reason I stayed away. Mom didn't just fight with people. She destroyed them. Anyone who crossed her ended up ruined. Or gone." "Gone?" My voice dropped. "What does that mean?" "Henry didn't just disappear," he said after a pause. He came back once, a few years after the fight. He wanted to share again. A month later, he vanished for good. Police called it a suicide, but nobody ever found a body. I gripped the phone tighter. And you think she? I don't think. I know. She told me the same thing she's telling you now, that some debts don't die. His voice cracked. You're chasing ghosts, Claire. Let them stay buried. The line clicked dead again. I sat there, shaking, my mind spinning. My mother. The woman who had raised me with bedtime stories and Sunday dinners. The woman who told me family was everything. What had she done? Outside, the rain had started again, thick drops splattering against the courthouse steps. I stuffed the journal back into my bag and drove to the address listed in the case file, an old post office box that had belonged to Henry. It led me to a small, boarded-up cabin on the edge of town. The air was colder here, the trees taller, the silence heavier. I pushed open the door, and the hinges groaned in protest. Inside, dust coated everything like snow. On the mantel, there were remnants of someone's life, a rusted lantern, a chipped mug, a stack of letters bound with twine. I picked one up, the paper brittle beneath my fingers. It was addressed to M. Weston, my mother. The writing was desperate, slanted. You can't keep pretending. The truth will eat through the walls you've built. I won't stop until you admit what you did. My knees gave out, and I sat on the floor, the letter trembling in my hands. I opened the next one. I forgive you. I just want to see Claire. I felt my throat tighten. He'd known about me. I wasn't just collateral damage. I was part of the reason he tried to come back. There were more letters, unopened, each darker than the last. The final one was torn, water-stained, but the ending was clear. If you don't answer, I'll come myself. I stared at the words until the shadows in the room seemed to shift. My mother hadn't just hidden his memory, she'd erased it. And the guilt she never spoke of had bled into every part of our lives, shaping the woman I'd become without me ever realizing it. I looked down at the journal in my lap. For the first time, I didn't want to open it. But I knew she'd written more, that somewhere in those last pages was her version of how it ended, the final act of whatever she'd done to protect what she thought was hers. The rain outside grew heavier, drowning out the sound of my breathing. I closed my eyes, and for a fleeting second, I could almost hear her voice again, steady, commanding, unrepentant. Some debts don't die. I opened my eyes, took a deep breath, and turned the next page. The ink on the next page was different, darker, smudged, as if her hand had trembled while she wrote. I buried the truth, but it never stayed down. He came back, knocking on my door like time itself. He wanted forgiveness. I wanted silence. My chest tightened. Beneath her words, there was a faint water stain that looked too much like a tear. Or maybe rain. I kept reading. He said he'd tell Claire everything. Said she deserved to know. But what would she do with that truth? What would it fix? Guilt doesn't fix, it only burns. I did what a mother should. I kept my child safe. I froze, my stomach twisting. What did she mean by did? My eyes darted across the lines again, searching for answers that weren't there. Outside, wind howled against the broken windows, and for a second, it almost sounded like a voice. I shoved the journal back into my bag and ran to the car. I didn't know where I was driving, only that I couldn't stay there anymore. The road cut through the woods like a scar, the rain slamming against the windshield. My mind spun with her words, every line a confession wrapped in justification. When I finally pulled over, it was near the lake where she used to take me as a child. The water was still, black under the storm clouds. I remembered her voice back then, soft, measured, telling me how the lake kept secrets, how the water forgave what the earth could not. Now those words felt like warnings I hadn't understood. I grabbed the flashlight from the glove box and stepped out into the rain. The mud clung to my shoes as I walked toward the dock. It was half-rotted, boards slick with moss, the smell of decay heavy in the air. I knelt at the edge, my reflection fractured by the rain. Then I noticed it, a shape under the water, faint but unmistakable. Something large, half buried in the silt. My breath caught. I crouched closer, the beam of my flashlight flickering against the ripples. For a moment, I thought it was just driftwood, but the outline was wrong. Too smooth, too deliberate. My heart pounded. I stumbled back, slipping in the mud, my hands shaking. My mind was already filling in the blanks. Henry's disappearance, her cryptic words, the way she never let me near the lake growing up. I didn't want it to be true. I didn't want to know, but I did. And once I knew, there was no way back. I drove to the nearest police station, my wet clothes clinging to my skin. The officer at the front desk looked up from his computer, startled. "Can I help you, miss?" I think I found something at Lake Woodmere," I stammered. "Something human." Within minutes, the place came alive, radios buzzing, officers moving, headlights slicing through the rain. They followed me back, their boots squelching through the mud, flashlights cutting across the lake. When one of them shouted, "We've got something," my knees almost gave out. They pulled a rusted metal trunk from the water. Inside, bones. Human remains. My mother's lake had given up its secret. I sat in the back of a police car, staring at my trembling hands. Everything felt unreal, like I was watching it happen to someone else. An officer approached, his expression grim but gentle. "We'll need to take a statement. You said the name was Henry Weston?" I nodded, barely hearing myself when I spoke. He was my uncle. The word felt foreign. The ride back to the station blurred into silence. They took my statement, photographed the journal, bagged it as evidence. I watched as they placed it on a table, next to a file labeled Weston, Margaret, deceased. The sight of her name next to his made me nauseous. When they finally let me go, dawn was breaking. I sat in the car, staring at the horizon as light crept over the water. The world looked the same, but I wasn't. My phone buzzed again. "Daniel." I hesitated before answering. "You were right," I said quietly. She did it. There was silence on the line, then a sharp inhale. "I told you," he said, his voice breaking. "I told you to leave it." "How long did you know?" I asked. "Since I was 16, he admitted. "I overheard her arguing with Dad one night. He wanted to go to the police. She told him it would destroy us. And he stayed quiet, for us." I leaned my head against the steering wheel, the weight of everything pressing down. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were her favorite," he said bitterly. "You saw what you wanted to see. You believed in her goodness. I couldn't take that from you." The line went quiet for a long moment. Then he said softly, "What are you going to do now?" I looked at the lake again, sunlight glinting on its surface. "I don't know," I whispered. "Maybe try to forgive her. Maybe I can't. But I need to understand." I hung up and drove back to the old house one last time. It stood silent, hollow. I walked to the study and sat where she used to write. The air smelled of dust and faint perfume. I took the journal from my bag, opened to the last page. There was one final entry. "If she ever finds this, tell her I did it for love. Tell her I carried the blame so she'd never have to. Tell her not to hate me. Hate the silence instead." My tears fell onto the page, blurring the words. I closed the journal and held it against my chest. Outside, the storm had passed. The lake glimmered in the distance, calm now, as if it too had decided to rest. I sat there until the light changed, feeling the first fragile stirrings of peace. Some debts don't die, but maybe forgiveness, if it ever comes, doesn't either. Morning bled slowly into gold and gray as I stood before the house, one last time. Its walls seemed smaller now, fragile almost, as though the truth itself had hollowed them out. The front door hung slightly ajar, something I hadn't noticed before. Inside, everything was eerily still, as if the air was holding its breath. I went back to the study, tracing my fingers along the desk where she used to write. Beneath one of the drawers, a faint sound, a click. My pulse spiked. I tugged, and a false panel slid loose. Inside was another notebook, smaller, wrapped in a yellowed handkerchief. My hands trembled as I opened it. The first page was dated just 2 days before she died. I hear him again in my dreams. Henry, at the window, whispering that the water never forgets. I know it's not real, but guilt has a voice now. It speaks in his. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine. The pages ahead grew more frantic, her handwriting jagged, as though she had written in darkness. Daniel knows something. I see it in his eyes. Claire must never. She wouldn't understand. The truth is not what it seems. Henry wasn't innocent either. He came that night to hurt us, to take what wasn't his. I froze, the words searing into me. To take what wasn't his. Did she mean the inheritance? Or something deeper? Another line followed, smeared with what looked like tears. I didn't plan it. But when he struck me, I pushed back. He fell. The sound of him hitting the dock, it's all I hear now. The lake did the rest. I told myself it was an accident. But mothers aren't supposed to bury accidents. I dropped the journal, breath ragged. She hadn't been a monster. But she wasn't innocent either. The storm outside had raged that night, just like tonight's memory of her words, and the water had buried more than just a man. It had buried who she was. I stepped outside, clutching both journals to my chest. The morning had burned into an afternoon haze. The police tape around the lake fluttered weakly in the breeze. I walked past it, down to the dock again. A detective was there, Reynolds, the one who'd questioned me last night. He turned when he saw me. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his tone stern but not unkind. "I found another journal," I told him, my voice hoarse. It changes things." His eyes narrowed. "Changes how?" I handed it to him, pages still damp from my hands. He flipped through it silently, jaw tightening. When he looked up again, there was a different weight in his expression. "This doesn't absolve her," he said quietly, "but it does explain her." I nodded, unable to speak. He closed the notebook gently, almost respectfully. "We'll add this to the file. You should go home, Claire." Home. The word hit like a stone. I didn't even know what that meant anymore. I drove to Daniel's place instead. He lived on the edge of town, a small cabin near the ridge. When he opened the door and saw my face, he didn't ask. I set the journals on his table. "She didn't mean to kill him," I said. "But she did. And she lied, to protect us." He stared down at them, his jaw tightening. "I thought so," he said finally. "Dad used to say she'd do anything for us. I just didn't think he meant anything." We sat in silence for a long time. The only sound was the faint crackle of his fireplace. Then Daniel spoke again, softer. "So what now? Do we let the past rot with her, or do we make it right?" I looked into the flames, their orange light flickering against the dark. "I don't think there's a right anymore," I said. "Only what we can live with." He nodded slowly, and for the first time in years, there wasn't anger in his eyes, only exhaustion and a shared grief. I took one of the journals, the older one, and stood. "I'll keep this," I said, not to remember her lies, but to understand why she told them. He didn't stop me. When I left, the wind carried the faint scent of rain again, the kind that feels like a warning and a cleansing at once. Back at the lake, the water had turned to glass under the sunset. The police cars were gone now. The dock was cordoned off, empty but somehow alive with everything that had happened. I stood there, watching my reflection ripple. My mother had lived her life balancing love and guilt, and now both were mine to carry. I whispered into the wind, "I forgive you." The words felt heavy at first, like stones in my mouth, but when I said them again, softer, something inside me cracked open. A strange peace, raw but real, filled the silence she'd left behind. I turned to leave, the last of the light slipping through the trees. Behind me, the lake shimmered in the dying sun, holding its secrets one final time. It took me almost a year to sell the house. Every room still smelled like her, lavender, dust, and the faint metallic scent of old paper. I didn't rush it. I went through everything slowly, the way you sort through memories you're not sure you're ready to let go of. The neighbors stopped asking questions after a while, though sometimes I caught them watching from their porches, pretending to water plants or check mail that never came. In a small town, silence has its own volume. The day I handed the keys to the realtor, I stood in the kitchen for a long time. The morning sun was spilling across the counter, landing on the same spot where I'd found her teacup the morning after she died. I tried to imagine her there again, hair pinned neatly, eyes fixed somewhere far away, as if she could already see the end coming. But all that stared back was an empty window and the faint hum of a world that had moved on. I left one thing behind, though, her favorite mug, the one with the chipped rim. It didn't feel right to take it. Some things belong to ghosts. The drive back to the city was quiet. I had both of her journals in a small box on the seat beside me, wrapped in the same handkerchief I'd found in the drawer. Every time I stopped at a light, I caught myself glancing at it, as if it might open on its own and finish the story she'd started. But the truth is, there were no missing pages anymore. Only choices left to live with. Daniel didn't answer my calls for weeks. Then one night, as I was sorting through boxes in my new apartment, he showed up at my door. He looked older, more worn than I remembered. He didn't come inside right away. "You kept them," he said, nodding at the journals stacked on my coffee table. "I thought you'd burn them." "I thought about it," I said, "but someone should remember what really happened." He nodded, stepping inside. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt less like a wall now, more like an old scar that still hurt when it rained. Finally, he said, I've been thinking about what she wrote. That line about love being a storm. Maybe that's what she was trying to do. Protect us from drowning in her mistakes. I looked at him, the light from the window catching the faint gray in his hair. Or maybe she wanted us to understand that storms don't choose who they destroy. He smiled faintly, not disagreeing. Maybe. He picked up the smaller journal and held it gently, like it might crumble. You think she ever forgave herself? I think she tried to, I said. But she didn't know how. He set it down again and exhaled slowly. Then maybe it's on us to finish what she couldn't. I didn't answer, but I knew what he meant. Forgiveness wasn't a gift, it was an inheritance. And like any inheritance, it came with conditions. Weeks passed. I started writing again, not about her directly, but about the weight people leave behind when they die, and how the living carry it without realizing it. The words came easier now, even when they hurt. One evening, Daniel sent me a short note. There's a bench by the lake now. They took the tape down. You should come see it. When I arrived, the air was cold, the kind of crisp that makes the world feel sharper. The lake was still, the surface catching the last of the light. Near the edge stood a simple wooden bench, carved with her name and the words, "Love endures in silence." I didn't know who had chosen them. Maybe Daniel, maybe the town, but they felt right. I sat down, the wood cool beneath my palms. The water lapped softly at the dock. For the first time, I didn't see her standing there or hear her voice in my head. What I saw instead was the reflection of two people, Daniel and me, seated side by side, quiet but unbroken. We didn't need to speak. The silence was enough. As the sun slipped below the horizon, he handed me a small envelope. Dad's letters, he said. I found them in the attic. You should read them. That night, back in my apartment, I opened the first one. The paper was brittle, the handwriting rough, but unmistakably his. If anyone ever reads this, know that what happened that night wasn't simple. We both made mistakes. I was angry, and she was scared. I shouldn't have gone back to the lake. My hands shook. I read the rest under the dim light of my desk lamp. Tell the kids not to carry our sins. They have their own lives to build, and the truth, whatever it is, shouldn't keep them from living. I closed the letter, tears blurring the ink. For the first time, I realized the journals weren't the whole story. They were just her version. His version had been waiting all along, buried in silence, like everything else in our family. The next morning, I drove back to the lake one last time. The air was heavy with mist. I brought both journals and his letter, setting them on the bench. I didn't read them again. I didn't need to. I just sat there, watching the fog roll over the water until the outlines of the dock disappeared. When the wind picked up, I stood and let the letter go. It danced briefly before touching the water, then sank without a ripple. Driving away, I felt something shift inside me. The guilt wasn't gone, not entirely, but it no longer felt like a chain. It felt like a scar that had finally stopped bleeding. Months later, I published a short piece titled Inheritance. It wasn't about her or him by name. It was about what we owe to those who came before us, and what we don't. It was about the lies we tell ourselves to survive the people we love. It didn't make me famous. It didn't fix anything, but it made me feel lighter. Sometimes, late at night, I still dream about the house. Not the way it was before she died, but empty, sunlight spilling through cracked windows, wind moving the curtains like breath. And in those dreams, I walk from room to room, not looking for her anymore, but for myself. Because maybe that's the real inheritance she left behind. Not the guilt, not the truth, but the chance to begin again. When I wake, I write. And when I write, I remember her not as the woman who lied, but as the woman who tried. And maybe that's enough.